Hi, everybody. It's 1 o'clock Central Time. Time for us to get the show on the road. The show's not going to be a complete hour, I don't believe. I think it's going to be about 45 minutes. I'm suffering from the dreaded we upgraded your PC phenomena, so now it's not closing any of my windows. So when I went to open up the tab after I'd set StreamYard up today, it said, "Do you want to open all 16 tabs?" And it was opening up tabs I opened a week. I have to go in and figure out how to get past that little problem. But I want to thank everybody who has been around for the 9 candles. And I've enjoyed doing them. I enjoyed getting there every night to run the premieres. And somebody said, "Well, could you kind of summarize what you think you learned from the 9 candles?" That was a comment that came in. So, in a couple minutes, I'm going to start by doing that. Um, the 9 candles this time um, came from the poem "Becoming." And when I was thinking, oh, I want to expand and become, I didn't want to expand and become into Microsoft. Decided to take over my computer and eliminating my Google references. I've been through this with them before. Um, I know I can get it all back, but it's just a pain in the butt to have to do it again. Uh, let's see. I want to thank everybody who participated in the 9 candles, all those of you who watched it, and all of those of you who the the, the readers and the psychics and the astrologers that came on. Danny did the introduction. Dorothy Morgan was day 1. Terry from Holding Your Space was day 2. Day 3 was Allie from Heart Soul Connected. Day 4 was Dr. G. Day 5 was Jeffrey Ripecolor from Mexico. Day 6 was Sheila. Day 7 was Nancy Cast from Nancy Castro, who's re-upping her channel again. Day 8 was Scott, who I normally talk politics with, but this time we didn't. We talked other things, and I thought his had some really interesting things I carried away from his. And day 9 was it was Kim from Intuitive View. And the day 1 with Danny, he and I were supposed to explain to everybody how to use the 9 candles. And when I listened to it, I realized we talked about kind of our perspective of the 9 candles, but not really how to use it, how to set intentions or do whatever you want to do with it. Because this time the 9 candles was really all about you as an individual. And that's really what we wanted to emphasize. And when you listen to the whole thing, Danny was the longest show of the ones we ran. They run about 15 to 30 minutes, depending. And I've put them in a playlist. So if you missed any of them and you want to go back, you don't have to dig back through all my videos. They're all together in a playlist. And there's 10 shows in the 9 candles, with the introductory show being one. On day 1, when I worked with Dorothy Morgan, I always like to start with Dorothy because she gives such a good kind of clear overview of the energies that are around us. And of course, as she always points out, you have to know how to use that energy for yourself, as well as, um, because the planets can predict, but they don't dictate. And it's a different thing. They can say, yeah, the rhythms can go this way, but you can swim against the rhythm, or you can know it's going to be a harder time and just decide, I'm just not going to worry about it being harder. Don't tie yourself to what's going on in the future. Her whole emphasis was a lot of what's going on around us in the planets is there for the present. It's there to teach us how to deal with the present. And then day 2, Terry holding your space. Her question from the 9 candles was, who am I? And what a complicated question that is, because it can change from minute to minute, from day to day, certainly from year to year. And she talked about the importance of using your words, naming your emotions, understanding what's going on around you, and moving through the things without fear, to understand that at the end it's for your highest good. And and I know that's hard stuff to go through. We're going through a little bit of that in our house now. We're going to have to put a cat is going to cross the Rainbow Bridge because it's just not fair to keep that cat alive any longer. He's a China Blue, he's a beautiful cat. He's 15, 16 years old, and he's just literally giving up the ghost would be the proper term. And so today is his last day home. We brought him home because it belongs to my youngest child, Susan, tech support. And Ua's going to go to the vet probably tonight, maybe tomorrow morning. But Ua loves ham. I mean, that cat would do anything to get a piece of ham. And it's loving the ham it can take. And it's just having a good time. So I know what she means. You just have to kind of say, this is really for the best. And we all talked about it yesterday. We decided it was for the best because we knew it was coming. Ua got exposed to feline AIDS, and at one point when they lived in the suburbs, and Ua got out, and that's been kind of a downward trip for the poor kitty since then. Anyway, her thing. So I noticed when I was watching your show last night, summarizing, and I went, yeah, you just got to ride those emotions out, because I was there when we brought Ua home from the shelter group that had taken care of him. And Ua, by the way, means thunderstorm, because Ua was found by a woman that lived in the neighborhood where the shelter was. And I don't know how they do it in other parts of the country, but in Texas, they put these like hay rolls to stop stuff from washing into our sewage system. And she found Ua, she heard the screaming, and he was clinging onto the edge of a hay roll, about to go down the drain. And this woman was from Hawaii, so she named the cat Ua for thunderstorm, because that's where he was found. And we just hope he crosses this Rainbow Bridge as happily as possible. So I really felt Terry's stuff today when I was looking at it. Day 3 was Allie from Heart and Soul Connected. And Allie, when we opened it up, she said, I want to talk about balance. And that's what we talked about the importance of physical balance, mental balance, emotional balance, and how do we keep that for ourselves, and to be aware of when we're getting a little out of balance. And that's when she and I were taping, we were both at points where we were in power grids that were having problems. So somewhere in the middle of that, she and I froze, and the show actually broke. But when I was turning around to come back on and say, we'll start again, she popped back in. I popped back into her feed. So that's the video where I learned how to edit. So the 2 minutes of when there was nothing there, I managed to figure out how to edit that out. I'm very proud of myself for that. And that was showing balance, how to make things work so we didn't have to redo the show. Day 4 was Dr. Gale, and in the poem about becoming, it says, you're not changing, you're becoming. You're letting go of all these chunks that you've adorned yourself with that you don't need anymore. So Dr. G, when I was talking to Dr. Gale, she said, well, I didn't know what I was going to talk about this time, but she said, then I read the poem again, and she'd had a dream. Well, she'd had a nighttime thing. She was off. She's been working with some aliens, and they're taking her into 7-dimensional worlds. Not a place I go, a place she goes. Anyway, she said they put her in this thing. It was like a salad spinner. and she could feel bits of her energy flying off of her all over the place. And she realized um, that she she was doing exactly what the poem said, dropping pieces of herself off, changing, moving, so she can become what she wants to become. And what she felt was interesting about it was she'd noticed her root chakra was slightly smaller, but her heart chakra had grown. So as you let those things go, you can tie more into the other parts of your body and yourself. Um, Day 5 was Jeff, and how when you're moving along in a spiritual path, your spirituality will express itself in certain ways, and then it'll shift, it'll change. You'll find out what you have a gift that's expanded, moved to a new direction. You'll have a gift that you don't relate to as well anymore, and you move on to the next thing. And if you listen to his day, um, he's Jeff's a good one to talk about change and dealing with sudden change and having to adjust. And what he points out is what you have to do is you have to grow your spiritual connections, and that can mean letting go of things that you're not really relating to. Um, then day 6 was Sheila, and Sheila talks about growth also, but she talks about how people say, well, just do what you're good at, figure out what you're good at, and maybe that's not the easiest thing to do. So she will, and she was getting very frustrated, so she followed a lot of paths. And I've done the same thing. I think anybody that has any age on them has, where you decided it looks better to go down that path, because I mean there's a lot of people down there doing something. At least they're doing something, and they're not sitting here like me. And you find out as you grow down those paths that they're false paths, they're not good paths, they're not the ones that are good for you. And how that's an important lesson to learn, is learn to how to let them go and not to be so stubborn that, well, I've started doing it this way, and this is how mommy did it, this is how my family always did it, I'm going to do it this way, it's going to work. We need to shift our orientation about that. um, and that's really learning to find your own path and sticking to it. Hi, Dr. Gail. Dr. Gail's in. We've already talked about your day. Day 7 was Nancy Cast, and she's Nancy Castro. You may not be that familiar with her. She's in the chat a lot. I've actually physically met with her several times because when she came through Dallas, we got in touch a couple of years ago, and then she visited a friend in Fort Worth, and we met then. And when she and I were talking because she's um, reopening her channel. She made a big move, and you guys have no idea about what all it takes to have a channel set up, a place to work from. So she's opening her channel. She'll be out there, and um, the story she fell back to about change was the fact that caterpillars become butterflies, and actually the genetics in the caterpillar is stronger to keep it a caterpillar than to make it a butterfly. But the more that once they get in the cocoon, it's kind of done. That caterpillar is going to change, and it changes. There's like 2 sets of genetics in there, and the butterfly ones take over, and you feel so light. And a lot of that is, I can't imagine how scary it must be for this little thing that creeps and crawls around on branches, all of a sudden to get the message one day from its guides to wrap yourself up in a cocoon and see what happens. And then when they come out, they're so utterly different than they were when they went in. That's a real metamorphosis. And she talked about um, how, in a way, we have to be ready at any time to understand we may think we're butterflies, but we're still caterpillars, and we may need to slow down and grow again. And that was day 7. Her other thought that I got out of Nancy's was, there's that thing about a maiden a woman crone, the 3 stones, and she wanted to get a 3-stone ring, and she wanted them to reflect her um, her life path, because she said she's my age, she's in her mid 70s, and so she said I'm clearly elder, but um, I don't want to think I'm a crone. That's got all the negative connotations from Grimm's fairy tales. So what she decided her 3 stones stood for was girl, woman, and goddess. You get old enough, you get to be a goddess. So we've declared ourselves that we get to be goddesses, or that's what we choose to picture ourselves as. Day 8 was interesting because I did it with Scott, who I talk with every week on Sunday mornings. Except we do politics on Sunday mornings. This time we were talking about our personal adventures, and he was talking about he works in the outside world. He's not just a reader. He's actually he drives a produce truck and delivers to various grocery stores and I think it's mostly meat and eggs that he delivers. He delivers that kind of stuff. That's what he does. And he was a farmer, and he has a real feel for the land, and he's up in Wisconsin. And he relayed, if you want to go back and listen to that one, he relayed um, a story about how even before COVID, the truckers would just line up to get their stuff from the truck into the store, and nobody talked much to each other. He said during COVID, of course, I don't know how many of you realize this, but I had a friend who was in a business related to trucking, and truckers took an enormous hit during COVID because without them moving our goods around, they weren't going anywhere, and they were out there pre-vaccine, anyway, protect yourselves. And that's why if you listen to any kind of talk radio, you'll hear them advertising for truckers all the time because they're a rare commodity. A lot of them had to quit. A lot of them got sick and couldn't go back to what they were doing prior to that. A lot of them died. And it was one of the more heavily hit industries. And Scott talked about how during that time they didn't talk to each other much. But recently, people just been coming up and talking about how you doing, like your job, real human conversations that are not deep, and they're not like, I understand you do readings or anything. And we got into how more of that part of our humanity is coming out, even though it seems like we're in a time of such derision and division. But maybe we're not. Maybe it is shifting some, so it's safer to go there. He also talked about a guy who, prior to COVID, was making it in the world of meat packing, but he was working for a large store, working his way up the chain, ended up being the head of the butchering department, the meat department, and how he really hated it. He hated bossing people around. He hated doing it. So he got a chance to open a little small specialty meat shop, and that's what he runs. And he said it took him a while of being in that environment that he now controlled, what was kind of his world, to figure out it's better here. I don't have the big title, I don't have the big company behind me, but I'm happier. And he talked about meeting someone and she made him happier, and how when people come in this store now, he recognizes the kind of angry some people just carry inside themselves all the time, and he just tries to kill them with kindness. And he said he watches them turn around, and why would you walk into a meat store angry? But I guess if you're angry that day, you're angry that day. But he's talking to Scott about how his whole life had changed, and how now that he'd chosen to take control of his own life, how much happier he was. And that whole conversation with him about the activity that happens around your food. I saw a foodologist, a food futurist. She was a food futurist, and she's been out for like 20 something years doing this, watching food trends, being one of the people they talk to. I've known other futurists. I had a friend who was one who worked for the airline, and they tried to look into the future, just not the way we do it, but with different ways, to look into the future and see what patterns people would be looking for. So that was in relation to travel industry and stuff. But she's a food futurist, and she said one of the things she's learned about food is she eats at home a lot, even though she knows what are the best. She's in London, the best restaurants in London, the best restaurants in Europe. She does eat out in them, but she said, think of the chaos that goes on around your food if you're ordering it in a restaurant that isn't a happy place to be. And people are under a lot of stress. And she says that energy is in your food. And one of the things Scott and I ended up talking about was creating safety about around the food that we even consume, to bless it, to thank the universe for it, to give it a time to calm down and us a time to calm down, to be relate to it. Because I eat almost all my meals at home, and a couple restaurants I go to, I won't go in one that I think is tense and furious and way overcrowded and stuff. Um, and I, not that I don't enjoy eating out, but I think there is a certain amount of thought that if you know how your food's been treated and handled, and I know now all the vegans are going to be writing me, well, why aren't you a vegan? I'm just not. But um, that you can come to terms with the chaos that goes on around your food being created. And, you know, that's kind of a thought from Scott's show about how we can deal with becoming. Day 9 was Dear Sweet Kim, from Intuitive View, Kim Carey. And she and I hadn't really had a chance to talk in about a year and a half, because she's been doing this new thing where she's using orbs in her mediumship. And if you don't follow her, if you only follow her for her political insights, which are pretty good, I mean, I like them. Um, but Kim was talking about going through this shift. And when I read Becoming, when I contact the readers, I contact them all and say, do you want to become part of this? Sometimes they can make it, sometimes they can't. She jumped right on it and said, yeah, she really want to be part of it. She and Sheila, and I think maybe Danny, have always been part of it. But anyway, um, she was talking about the changes that doing the kind of work she does now, it's very different than being. She was a psychic who was what I call a scribbler. She has a pad in front of her, and her hands running the pen, and she sees the patterns in the writing. I don't do that. I understand how it could work, but I don't really do that. And she said that she'd had to learn to trust her own instincts. Once she thought she started working with the orbs, it was, oh, what fun! Let's look at these orb things. And then I don't know if you've ever seen any of her things where she sits in the dark with a night camera on her, and you can see all the orbs swarming around her. But she said one of the things she's found is a lot of people will seek her out as a medium because they're so wrecked with grief about the person on the other side, and what was said, what wasn't said, how to deal with it. And she's found this as a way to let the feelings go. And she talks about her going through that transition, which I assume she would have had to have done to have gone in, because I don't know anybody else that's working with the world that way. And so she's having to kind of figure it out on her own. And I'll tell you right now, one of the shows that I've done out of all 9 candles, everything else, I did it with Danny, medium Kim, and Danny Shea's brother, who's a chaplain at a major hospital. And I had done a show on, my husband died when he was 72. And I knew exactly what day I would be the same age to the day that he was when he died. And he and I, it wasn't fortunate for him, I guess, but it was fortunate. He had a stroke, and while he was recovering from the stroke, they found out he had cancer. And at that point, he just said, "Get me out of here." So I had to work with the doctors to get him out as pain free as possible. But that gave him and I a little over 2.5 months to really talk about everything that we wanted to talk about. And it was amazing, for as close as we'd been for the 20 years before, what it was like during that period of time when we lived in an agendaless world. And my whole life had taken a complete change. I was working in a completely different field. I was working with a bunch of people he didn't know. And yet the job I had, I could do remotely. So I could do it from his hospital room. And we really got to spend some time kind of getting rid of all of those, what do you think about this? And where, and not every conversation was deep. We talked about some of the funny, weird things that happened while we were married and together. And, but he and I had, through my church, gone through a study of death and dying, and we'd already been through all these questions 30 years before it happened. And Danny heard me speak about that on the day that I said Bill died, and I am now his age, and now I really am on my own, because I can't say my husband, who was so much older than me, because I was now the age he was when I was saying, because he was 20 years my senior. But Danny called me up and he said, we need to do a show on what you're talking about, out preparing people for death and dying and separating from people and separating from things. And so Kim, Medium Kim, if you don't know it, she's a hospice nurse, and his brother being a chaplain. And we just talked about, they saw it from a very different perspective. Bill and I, we were aware what was going to happen. We'd already talked about it 30 years before. Came down to the time, I knew how much he wanted to put up with. He knew that I knew like when to make decisions about things. And there was no second guessing. It was my phone making a noise, sorry. And I'm really proud of that show, because I really think it's something we need to happen, because the questions I always get from people are the ones that are troublesome and very hard to deal with are, weirdly enough, marriages, when people are getting married and what that does in the family and who gets chosen for what and all these patterns that sits up. And then the other part is people who can't come to terms with someone died, and I feel sorry for people when someone dies suddenly, because you don't have a chance to maybe close some of the chapters and ask some of the questions you would have wanted to ask. And they're not all grim. I asked Bill, he was a physicist and he worked for Texas Instruments, and he worked with building microchips. And a lot of the microchip stuff he did goes into space. And they couldn't send microchips into space until they developed this epoxy that sealed the little connections, because the solar winds, the things that are the coronal emission events, would burn up the chips in the satellite. So I asked him, I said, well, is there anything in your whole life, I mean, anything you want, I mean, you don't have to tell me, but whatever, that you really, really regret? And he was lying in bed and he goes, that damned epoxy. And I said, what about the epoxy? I mean, that's why we can have the cell phones and GPS and all this stuff we have now. And he goes, that's why I hated it. I hate cell phones. And he was born in 1931, and he was used to a level of, but you can, anyway, he and I just sat there and laughed. And I said, well, and this was before cell phones. This was in 2004. This is before cell phones got to be like they are now. He'd really hate them now. He would ban them from being near him, I'm sure, if he could do it. And so that's one of the things that I thought about, and when I was reading through this stuff. And so that's summarizing the 9 candles. And I think each one of the people that's that spoke from their heart, and they each gave us a very different lesson in our bodies, our food, our lives, our choices, what we're going through, walking through it, making the right choice, learning, as Sheila and I talked about, saying, that's not a path I really want to go down, and turning around and coming back. I'm going to point out one person's question here. Somebody, there are now advanced directives, and there are pamphlets that have to do with this, that have to do with people who have or may know they have dementia in their family. I have a friend um, uh, who has, both of her parents have each died of a different kind of dementia, and she was the caretaker through all of it. And she wrote out a very clear directive. She told me about it. So you can find advanced directives for whatever the health situation is in your family. And the kindest thing you can do for them and for yourself is to make sure you make those plans clear. Now we're going to change to a completely different subject in a way. Summer solstice. It's today. And I was out talking to Hogarth earlier because it's going to be really warm here today. Not as warm as usual. You guys in the East Coast and the Midwest are getting Texas type heat, and you have all my sympathy. Don't send it down here. I don't, but you have all my sympathy. But yesterday it was in the 80s. It was absolutely gorgeous. And I went out to visit Hogarth, and let's see. I went out to visit Cecil, and there he is. That's what he looks like right now. He's all covered in lumps and bumps, and some of the green has come off of him because this shot's about 3 weeks old. But he's out there in the middle of the lawn, and the ley line has run up to him. And I was asking him. I had read some things where the ley lines have widened. And if you don't know what ley lines are, I'll tell you quickly. They're an energy line that runs through the earth, and where it hits me is when I have a ley line tree. That's what those lumps and bumps are. There's so much energy under that tree that it just can't grow it all out and leaves and stuff, so it gets those lumpy, bumpy things. Those, I always called them burls. And I've been talking to Cecil for a couple of years now, and I was out there last week saying, yeah, he is really gnarly. He is really gnarly. I went out and I said, is it true the ley lines are getting wider? And he said, well, you have your little dowsing. I have a little metal dowsing pendulum that I use. And I walked, and they've widened completely. And he said, look, they've left you a guideline. See if you can find it. And this is what I found in the ground. That is a leaf. Now, I don't know where y'all live, but leaves don't grow that color in Texas. But that's a leaf, and it's at the very edge of where I can feel the pulse of the ley line ending. So they left it for me, and it's an incredible blue leaf. And I mean, at first I thought it looked like a piece of plastic that had gotten caught in the soil. But it's really, really, really a little leaf. And I don't want to pick it up or do anything with it. I want to let it grow where it's supposed to be. But I've been out and I've taken a whole series of pictures of it. Yeah, he does look like he has a little smiley face on him. It's this wild electric blue. Well, now when I was out there yesterday, he's grown enough that he has 2 leaves. So I just can't even imagine what it's going to look like when he finishes growing. But that's what I've been up to for my solstice celebration, is talking to Hogarth, and it's a full moon too, guys. So is it full moon? Yeah, full moon. Almost full moon. We're about 3% away from being a full moon right now. So it's going to be a full moon within the next 24 hours. Lots of fun stuff going on. Now, for those of you who follow me because of crystals for solstice are citrine. Oh, Lori Hunsinger. She's been seeing them in her area too. Apparently, it's a leaf. It's got a little root that goes down on the ground. It's a leaf. And it's that color. And I've never seen a leaf grow out of a tree here that's that color. I know in the tropics they can be weird colors, but not here. I live in the semi-arid parts of Texas. 6:08 p.m. is Eastern time. 5:08 here. So we're almost on the full moon. So this is the time to go out because it's a solstice day. Beautiful, beautiful day. I saw some sunrise images from around Stonehenge and Aversbury. I can't ever say that, but it's another big area right by there. And the people out there beating their drums and enjoying being in nature and enjoying the change to summer. And it is a time when we recognize um, blossoming and growing and changing. And so just tonight, or this evening, it might be a nice time just to set a few minutes aside and thank the universe for helping us all grow and become stronger and help us as humanity to grow and appreciate the wonderful world of growth that's around us. And let's see, I have a reading right after this. I am building a grid for someone. I have a reading right after that, who's an old client, who's a person I know in the flesh, not just through Zoom. And I could have predicted she was going to call me on the solstice. She's very tied to a lot of those movements. And unless someone has a pressing question, you can get posted up here in the next 3 minutes. I'm more than I'd be willing to answer questions. Just nobody posted any today, which I thought was kind of interesting. And do go back, and if you missed any of the 9 candles, you can go back and find them. They're all in order. You can just click on them, and they're on playlists under my channel on YouTube. And other than that, I'll be with Scott on Sunday. On Saturday, I get to go be grandma and be there for both my grandchildren. Their birthdays are 2 weeks apart, so we're celebrating them this Saturday. And I'm going to get to go. Oh, Ronnie, anything other than citrine is crystal. Oops. Let's see. Well, let me see what I got. Tiger's Eye is a very empowering stone, and it can have a lot of gold in it. This is orange or yellow calcite. That's good for this time of year. It's got a lot of earthy feelings and earthy energies. And this is it's a kind of a golden quartz. It's quartz that, when it came out of the ground, had a tinge of gold to it. But really, any stone you want to pick up and say, you're it for me. I used to use this smoky quartz, which is both smoky and clear. And because this is a time when the world's transitioning. And I used to use that a lot. So, any other weird stones? This is yellow-orange calcite too. And calcites are relatively inexpensive, so they're kind of fun to keep around. And also, where's it? It's not here. It is. Also, another one that's gold, and it's gold. It's fool's gold. It's pyrite. Okay. This little teeny tiny cubic thing, that's not polished or any, that's how it came out of the mine. Pyrite is a very specific crystalline form, and it's gold, and that will do for the summer solstice because it gold like the sun. But whatever you feel drawn to is probably the stone you need today. And I think with that, I am going to uh, I'm I'm going to start a series on numbers and sacred geometry, and that'll explain a lot of the crystalline forms that are in the stones. I'm going to go through some of that with you. I'm going to try to do some more information you can find in a book if you want to go read it, but you don't have to. And I'm going to be watching. There's so much going on with the energetics of the world. I've started to keep a notebook on my travels in learning about energy. And I'm going to try to bring that to you because I think we're going to need that, because the last half of this year is going to be interesting. And I mean interesting in that if you choose to change and want to change, you can. If you don't want to, there's nothing that says you have to. But I think if you don't change, you're going to miss a lot of fun stuff you can learn how to do. And with that, I'm kind of done because I got to go do 2 more readings. So that's kind of take it out of me. And I've enjoyed being here with everybody. I put this show together at a request of some people who said, could you tell us what you thought you learned from the 9 candles? And I always learn so much from the 9 candles. So everybody, you have a lovely summer solstice. I hope it's not too hot where you are. And I want to thank each and every one of you for coming here and being here. Like, subscribe, and if you have other questions about any of the topics I'm starting to talk about, please get them to me so that I can get everybody's questions in there too. And it's going to be goodbye. Have a good day. Take care.